Dieselpunk, described as a love affair with the machine. A grungy, greasy world where gas, oil, and coal fuels a world in conflict. It is a retro-futuristic dystopia with diesel-based technology, birthing gargantuan vehicles of war and bathing the world in black and gray. With elements like world wars, Nazis, and careless pollution, this genre is easy to be overwhelmed by the industry and pessimism. But being such a dark and depressing world, how would it work with elements of fantasy? How far can we push dieselpunk stories? And what other resources and inspirations can we inspire our own adventures within the genre? Well, this is the Claret Corner, where we explore different flavors, genres, and histories in the TTRPG space. Here we will answer those questions in the exploration of one of many punk genres. If you want to see other punk and genre exploration videos, check out the playlist at the end of this video. If you stay till then, I'll have something for you, for free, as always, to bring to your TTRPG tables. Subscribe if you want to see more of these videos, but let's get into it. Dieselpunk has little fantasy at its roots, meaning the optimism and power fantasy you might find in genres like steampunk is all but completely absent in Dieselpunk, besides the moments of jazz and electro-swing music. It is a world where everything is covered by a thin layer of grease and populated with zeppelins, tanks, planes, submarines, and dreadnought battleships. Influenced by the interwar period between World War I and World War II, it reflects familiar aspects of the Great Depression and totalitarian regimes, though with a futuristic twist. It is an alternate history, not a real history, and can even exist in worlds that aren't Earth, though it isn't common. In reality, diesel engines weren't popularized until the 1950s, but Dieselpunk imagines a world where that technology was expedited, often because of the war effort. But in that war, good and evil is always in question, and no side has the moral superiority. It is a constant fight for who has the biggest guns, planes, trains, and even mech suits.
Yes, that's right. You see, there was a tiny flaw in the plan.
What was that, Tom?
It was bollocks.
Civilian propaganda is in full force, covering newspapers, posters, wartime pinups, and black and white TV. If you do need moral superiority, just add Nazis, as evil Germans are almost as popular within the genre as the fossil fuels itself. In dieselpunk stories that do not have Nazis, we'll often have other fascist-like governments that take the mantle. But that does not mean that every dieselpunk story must contain war, though if it doesn't, some sort of conflict is usually still in the background, or takes highlights or images thereof. Similarly, not everything is completely fueled by diesel, namely nuclear weapons that often threaten the warfront. But that is where the genre diverges into two parts just a little bit. The first, Autensian dieselpunk, is about as optimistic as dieselpunk gets. Defined by the unstoppable progress and unfaltering faith in the future, it often blends pulp-inspired adventures with a retro-futuristic aesthetic in an almost utopian world. A great example of this is in the 2004 movie Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. The story starts with our protagonist, the Sky Captain, fighting off giant mech robots in his fighter airplane. However, his former flame and news reporter, Polly Perkins, falls upon a larger plot where German scientists were planning a project called the World of Tomorrow. Their adventure takes them to mythical Shangri-La, a flying aircraft character the size of a military base, and a remote island with dinosaur-like creatures, ultimately leading them to a spaceship and revealing the mysterious project inside. It is important to note that the movie has no war as a central conflict, but just maintains the aesthetics of war with fighter planes, German scientists, and military technology. But additionally, with dinosaurs, giant robots, and mythical locations, you can see where Autensian dieselpunk can scrape the edges of science fiction and fantasy as well. The other divergence of dieselpunk is Pycraftian, and it is the far gloomier and dystopian side of the genre. In this world, the world wars never ended, and is either prolonged indefinitely by a Cold War, or already won by the fascist enemy as they continue their authoritarian rule into a technological future. A great recent example of this is the Man in the High Castle series, which explores a world where Hitler had won. But while it is set in the modern era, it still keeps to many aesthetics that are familiar to dieselpunk. But I do have to mention one of my favorite all-time dieselpunk movies as well, Iron Sky. a tongue-in-cheek movie about how Nazis were hiding out on the dark side of the moon for decades, waiting for a time to enact a full-scale UFO invasion, returning with a vengeance. In the sequel, the Nazis even find themselves in Hollow Earth. These films fall under another subcategory called Weird War Dieselpunk, where you often bring aliens, cult myths, futuristic tech, and even magic, and mix it with diesel engines and swastikas. But now that I think we got the aesthetic down, let's talk about what makes this genre punk. Dieselpunk is a special exception within the punk genres. Normally, a punk genre highlights characters and plot within the story, pushing against cultural and societal norms. It takes the taboo subject of war and Nazis and then combines them with the silly notions of diesel megastructures or vampires, in the case of the book Fiends of the Eastern Front. It risks offending the seriousness of the past with an irreverent perspective, even while it often keeps the doom and gloom atmosphere. Or it goes completely in on the silliness, like the movie Iron Sky, which I mentioned, almost like a parody. In an interesting way, adding fantasy, horror, or speculative fiction makes it punk. In a similar way, with more Attensian or optimistic depictions of dieselpunk, it challenges our perspective of the dirty grease of diesel and makes it a decadence. Where fossil fuels may be far from the ideal energy resource, with it having environmental concerns and cleanliness issues, anyone who's a mechanic knows of all the energy trades, it's definitely the dirtiest, but dieselpunk strives to glorify it and advances the technology to the extreme, throwing caution and cleanliness to the wind in an almost propagandist way, much like the video game Outer Worlds. And while the game may not have strictly diesel-powered vehicles being in space, the dirtiness, the 1930s depression aesthetic, and with the plethora of propaganda, definitely leans toward dieselpunk. There is an argument that it is atom punk, but that genre comes more from the 1950s and 60s and is much cleaner. We will get to that one in another episode. I have also fallen in love with Jacob Rosalski's dieselpunk art, perhaps commonly known for his work on Scythe, which is an excellent dieselpunk board game if you like strategy and resource games. His art, while grim, shows the beauty, relevance, and common use of diesel technology. But just as well, the punk in dieselpunk could also be going against the flow of expansionism, fascism, and growing nationalism, all of which were common in the interwar period, and leaning instead on the advancement of diesel technology and freedom. It fits the fantasy of giving life and limb for democracy, like what makes Helldivers so popular. But maybe we need a few more sources of inspiration to help you along. Looking at other dieselpunk sources in the media, we find movies like Captain America: The First Avenger, combining the Nazi regime with superheroes and supervillains with super soldier serum. Another superhero, Hellboy, literally rescued from Nazis as a baby, revisits the regime with demonic influence. And although Indiana Jones series isn't dieselpunk, you will find plenty of pulp and Nazi influence. The Rocketeer would also be a better example. Doctor Who episode The Empty Child is another. Dark City shows a dieselpunk without Nazis or diesel. Sucker Punch for guns and war in an insane dreamscape. The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Mortal Engines, and a fun Malaysian animated film, War of the Worlds: Goliath. In the realms of video games, BioShock is a popular one with dieselpunk aesthetics. Call of Duty, especially when it involves Nazis and zombies. Dino D-Day, Crimson Skies, Iron Harvest, set in the same universe as the Scythe game, Iron Brigade, and Frostpunk. In the literature realm, any of the Marvel noir comics might be a good place to start. The Mammoth Book of Dieselpunk, Mortal Engines again, but as a book, Dragonfly, Tin Can Tommies, Fatherland, A Fistful of Nothing, Leviathan, and much, much more. As far as tabletop games go, if you want to play in a dieselpunk world, the actual genre of dieselpunk was said to be popularized by Children of the Sun by Misguided Games, though you can also look into the Dust RPG from Modiphius, Tomorrow City from Osprey Publishing, Age of Steel from Isolation Games, and the Imperium of Warhammer 40k, even if the other armies aren't. Unfortunately, if you are playing explicitly Dungeons & Dragons, there isn't much resources in the realm of dieselpunk, But if I did play the genre with the system, I would keep to low magic classes like Ranger or Rogue, and even lean into the Artificer class, especially Armorer with its mech suit, and use vehicles that D&D already gives you for tanks and airplanes, using diesel instead of soul coins to power Blood War vehicles from Descent into Avernus book, for example. Or you can just use the free vehicles that I made specifically for this purpose in the description below, just as a thank you for staying to the end of the video. You can join my Patreon for the fancy PDF version, as well as 50+ PDF documents with subclasses, races, monsters, and more, all for just $10. If there are other resources that I missed in RPGs, books, or movies, make sure to comment them below for other people to reference. If you're looking for a campaign with stone technology or prehistoric dinosaurs, perhaps check out my Dieselpunk video next, or even more genres in the playlist. Until then, go out there and make your worlds a better place. See ya.